Okay, my dear friends, something extremely thought-provoking to start off tonight's story. Did you know that in the course of 1 year, the human body replaces 98% of the atoms that form it? And over the course of 7 years, we become, anatomically, a completely different person to the one we've been before. Makes you think, doesn't it? And if our body's changing like that, then what does it mean about the human memory? Now we know it's not the most reliable thing, and every time we remember something, basically we're replicating the memory in our mind, so it becomes a copy of a copy of a copy. So, how reliable is it? Makes you think, doesn't it? Well, that is the theme of tonight's story. How reliable are our memories, and where do we really come from, and where are we going? Anyway, without further ado, let's start tonight's story.
Shiloh by MC Sinister 765. Part 1. Why don't we start from the beginning, Mr. Solomon? I heard someone say to me as my blurred vision slowly came into focus and the unmistakable scent of cigar smoke wafted into my nostrils. The smooth cadence of bittersweet jazz music from a nearby record player filled my ears, and the feeling of the soft leather recliner underneath my tired and sore limbs greeted me as I found my way back to consciousness. I didn't recognize the old man in the posh blue suit that sat at the polished mahogany desk in front of me, smoking that high-quality cigar while he stared at me expectantly with those deep crimson-red eyes of his. Nor did I remember walking into this well-furnished office that was laden with grim-looking bronze statues and melancholy, scenic paintings every which way I looked. Somewhere outside of my field of vision, I could hear the soft patter of summer rain against a window pane and the low rumble of traffic somewhere far below. I regarded the old man in front of me with an expression of confusion before I asked the first question that came to mind. Got a smoke?" I asked in a hoarse and raspy voice. The old man nodded as he reached into one of the desk drawers on his left side and produced a cigar of the same exquisite brand he was currently enjoying and reached across the desk to hand it to me. I received it with a grateful nod before I reached into my coat pocket and fished out a match to light it with. I took a deep drag from the cigar once it was lit and let the familiar taste of tobacco fill my lungs before I exhaled slowly, feeling perhaps a bit more relaxed than I should have before I questioned the stranger in front of me. If you don't mind me asking, who are you again?" The old man let out an unsurprised sigh before he responded. I'm your psychiatrist, Dr. Sweet. We've worked together for some time now." "Oh, that's so. Well, sorry, Doc. My memory's a bit fuzzy lately." No harm done. This is far from your first episode," he said in a tone that was probably meant to be reassuring. I sat up in the recliner a bit before I pressed the doctor for more information. "So, if you don't mind, Doc, could you tell me what I'm doing here right now? Everything's a bit hazy to me at the moment." You called me under a great deal of stress, asking to see me here in my office some time ago. When you arrived, you then confessed to several rather gruesome murders, some of which occurred over 20 years ago by your account, while others seem to have happened rather recently. You then began talking at great lengths about someone named Shiloh, and about a paint bucket from your father's garage, that in my professional opinion is the metaphorical center of your psychosis. The casual, matter-of-fact and oft-handed manner in which the doctor relayed this information made the implications of his words take several moments to dawn on me. When they did, my blood turned to ice. "Wait, I told you about Shiloh?" I asked him quietly. I could have sworn that I saw a slight glimpse of irritation flash across the old man's face as he replied. You haven't told me enough, Mr. Solomon. I don't think you fully appreciate how precarious of a situation you're in right now. If you don't tell me everything, I can't promise the treatments will be effective. You could very well end up killing someone else." He then pointed downward, which caused me to look down, and I immediately noticed the thick layer of mud that caked my shoes, and the drying blood that flaked beneath my fingertips and covered my palms. 1,000 questions surged through my panicked mind like jolts of electricity. Why could I not remember how I'd gotten into this office, or where I'd been before, and why would I tell this man, whom I didn't know from Adam, about Shiloh, when I've never been able to trust anyone living with that? I racked my brain for the last thing I could remember, and came up with nothing. Dr. Sweet seemed to pick up on my quickly growing hysteria, so he gently warned me that it was best to keep my thoughts on track. Well, it's best that you remain calm, Mr. Solomon. We'll just start from the beginning, spare no details, so I can help you. You want to get better, don't you? So, hold nothing back. Tell me about Shiloh. There was an almost imperceptible threat beneath his words that seemed to echo off of the walls, a promise of dire consequences should I not concede to his demands. I'd heard that same manner of speech from dozens of people in the past, mostly from dirty cops and wannabe tough guys who harbored grand delusions of being intimidating criminals. This man, though, this Dr. Sweet, was not like that at all. He didn't need to put on airs and try to be intimidating. He simply was in a way that was difficult to put into words. Simply sitting across from him, I couldn't help but recall that old Bible story I'd heard many times as a child from my father, about the man who'd been thrown into the lion's den. I wasn't sure if I could trust him. I wasn't sure of much of anything, to be honest. But not doing so, at least for the moment, seemed deeply unwise. So I simply laid back in the recliner, took another long drag from that exquisite cigar, while I racked my brain for the last thing I remembered. When a singular image pierced through my hazy memory like light from the fog, and I began my story. Coulter, Indiana, was a town of kind faces and cold hearts, a place that on its surface was indistinguishable from any other reasonably well-off town in the American Midwest, but for those who dared to look deeper, underneath the carefully crafted facade of dreary rural normalcy, there was a darkness waiting to be seen, hidden in plain sight, a darkness that did not speak, but was always listening and always watching. Coulter was far too large to be considered a small town, yet at the same time too small to be a city. Surrounded on all sides by tall cornfields and irregular patches of dense forest that seemed almost comically out of place amidst the decaying, abandoned farmhouses and tall grain silos that dotted the landscape around them, all overseen by a sky that seemed perpetually cloudy and overcast. It was on one such cloudy, overcast day in October that the carefully constructed blanket of denial and willful ignorance I'd wrapped myself in could protect me no longer, and I decided that I had to ask my father about something I'd seen in our garage a month earlier, something that still keeps me up at night, even to this day. I didn't know what I was going to say to my father that morning, only that I'd had to say something. I couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't act like everything was alright, and that I hadn't seen what I knew I saw. That I needed some confirmation that I wasn't insane. In all of the imaginary scenarios I played in my mind, where I confronted my father with what I saw, he always had an entirely reasonable explanation for it, some perfectly benign answer to the question that haunted me whenever I laid down to sleep, an answer that would make me feel stupid, and perhaps even guilty for even questioning that my dad was anything other than the hard-working, kind, and compassionate person that I knew he was. That everyone who knew him knew that he was. After all, my father, William Solomon, was the kind of man that everyone wanted to have as a neighbor. The kind of neighbor you could borrow power from if you couldn't afford to keep yours on for a while, or that you could call to pick you up when you'd had too much to drink and had no way to get home late at night. A contractor by trade, he was always ready to greet you with a warm smile and a strong handshake whenever you walked through his door, no matter who you were. Neighborhood kids affectionately called him Pops, and would listen to him tell wild stories out by the fire pit in our backyard for hours on end with all the theatrical vigor of a master storyteller. I remember when he used to pick me up from school when I was a kid in that clean, polished work truck of his. It was his pride and joy. How my chest would always swell with pride when the other kids would look at him in awe and ask who that imposing giant of a man was, and I'd answer, "That's my dad." He was the kind of father a son could be proud of, and I was proud of him, which is why when I finally asked him the question that had been eating at me, I fully expected him to lay all my doubts to rest. Doubt is a funny thing, though. It has a way of enduring even when it has no reason to. Like a quiet voice in the back of your mind that never goes away despite all your attempts to drown it out. And sometimes you find that the voice is entirely correct, no matter how much you want it to be wrong. I remember hearing the soft patter of rain outside my window that morning, and rolling over in my bed to see the glaring red display on my clock on the nightstand as it read 6:30 a.m. Somewhere downstairs I could hear movement in the kitchen, a steady thumping sound that I knew to be the rhythm of my dad's heavy work boots against the tiles, which was entirely ordinary for that time of day. Dad was always up at 6, eating breakfast by 6:30 and out the door by 7, like clockwork. It was his daily ritual, and Dad always carried out his daily rituals meticulously. I was always up relatively early in the mornings, so I sometimes ate with him down in the kitchen when I was awake enough and had the time to spare before I headed to school. And as I shook off the half-delirium of sleep and dressed myself in near total darkness, I decided that today would be the day that I asked him about the paint bucket. Apprehension and nervousness crept into my thoughts as I descended the stairs and went down into the kitchen, where Dad was waiting for me with his back turned as he hunched over the coffee pot on the counter. The kitchen light wasn't on, so the only illumination in the room was a small light that hung above the stove, and in the deep shadows of the early morning, Dad looked more imposing than I ever remembered him looking before. He stood over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and defined muscles given to him by a lifetime of hard manual labor. In that dark kitchen, he reminded me of a troll from some old fairy tale, huge and formidable. He must have heard me after a moment or so, because he flipped on the kitchen light and turned to look at me with a curious expression on his gruff, bearded face, before he said, "Morning, kiddo. How you doing?" with a warm, wide smile. "I'm all right. How are you?" "Oh, just grabbing a cup of coffee before I head out. You want some?" "Sure." I then took a seat at the table while Dad reached into a nearby cabinet and produced a plain white coffee mug and filled it to the brim before handing it to me. When he did, I finally let loose the question. "Dad, can I ask you about something?" "Sure, what's on your mind?" My tongue suddenly felt several tons heavier in my throat, and I answered somewhat slowly. "What's in the paint bucket?" There was no detectable change in his placid expression as he answered, "Well, you usually keep paint in paint buckets, kiddo. It's right there in the name." "I mean, the one in the garage, the big one." Again, his expression told me nothing about his inner thoughts as he replied, "Well, I don't keep paint buckets in the garage. You sure you're not thinking of something else?" "Well, it's a big 5-gallon bucket under your work table by the door." He scratched his head as if to show that he was trying hard to remember. "Oh, no, doesn't sound familiar." It was moving, like something was inside trying to get out. I could hear it crying. Well, that made him chuckle. "Sounds like you had a nightmare, kiddo. Too much sugar before bed and whatnot. Well, there's no paint bucket in the garage," he said with a reassuring smile. Well, the smoothness of the conversation made my earlier apprehension about it seem somewhat silly and childish. Dad's confident demeanor made me wonder if maybe I had dreamed that night in the garage. That explanation seemed plausible to me at the time, or at least I desperately wanted it to be. The alternative seemed too terrible to consider. "Can I ask you something, son?" Dad asked, suddenly shifting into a tone of voice that told me he was deep in thought about something, effectively changing the subject. I was somewhat timid in my reply, because Dad only called me son when he wanted to talk about something serious. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "Hey, you still believe in angels?" he asked hopefully. I couldn't really fathom where this question could have come from, or how it fit into that conversation. The vague hint of desperation in Dad's tone while he asked it was more than a bit off-putting, but I answered anyway. Yeah, I guess. A look of relief washed over Dad's face as he listened to my reply. That's really good to hear. This world punishes believers, so many stop believing as they get older. I'm so glad that hasn't happened to you. You know, I used to think I was your guardian angel when you were a baby, and I had to be your sword and shield, protect you from all the putrid wickedness of the world. Now that I'm older, though, I see I had it all mixed up. And the truth is, you're my guardian angel, son. You and Shiloh are my lights amidst all this darkness. You keep me sane. I love you. I'd do anything for you two. And I hope you know that. Oh, my heart twisted in my chest at his mention of my younger brother. Shiloh was a stillbirth that destroyed my parents. They were never the same afterwards. Both became wilted shadows of the people they'd used to be. My mother would stay in bed for days without moving, and even when she did get up, she rarely spoke and ate very little. I recall waking up late one night while Dad was still out working, to the sound of her sobbing uncontrollably. When I got up to comfort her, I found her not in her and Dad's bedroom, but instead in the room that was meant to be Shiloh's. I found her propped up against his empty crib, surrounded by little toys and clothes that had been gifts from our relatives. Once symbols of joy, now macabre reminders of what could have been. I tried to help her up and take her back to bed, but she didn't move, didn't seem to notice me at all. She was a woman totally defeated by the callous indifference of the world. None of my attempts to comfort her made a difference. Or if it did, I have no way of knowing about it, because one morning I woke up to find her gone. Just me and Dad after that. While I was devastated, my father's reaction seemed to be to retreat into himself and live in a state of denial. He refused to acknowledge Shiloh's death and never talked about Mum skipping town. Whenever he spoke about Shiloh, however, he spoke as if he were alive, and it saddened me very greatly every time I heard it. I never contradicted him when he got like that. Didn't have the heart to. So I just nodded and played along as I believed any dutiful and caring son should have, and said, "Stillborn?" interjected Dr. Sweet, cutting off my recitation. I'd been so lost in memories of the past that I'd almost forgotten he was sitting across from me, never speaking but always listening, and always watching. Until now. His interruption caused me to lose my train of thought, and I stammered with my immediate response to his question. "What?" I asked him, confused. His aged face was a placid mask, but I could see frustration and anger in his red eyes that burned like hot coals as he clarified his question calmly. "You say your younger brother was a stillborn. You're being inconsistent again, Mr. Solomon. Last time you told me this story, you said that your younger brother Shiloh died at the age of 15. A few nights after the two of you confronted your father in the kitchen together about what the two of you had seen in the garage. I blinked a few times in response before I voiced my confusion. I did? Yeah, and the time before that you said that Shiloh was just a friend of yours from the next door, that your father ran over with his work truck while pursuing you. Oh, which is it, Mr. Sharp? I've endeavored to be patient with you, given how peculiar and extreme your situation is, but even I have my limits. So, who is Shiloh? Dr. Sweet asked in a heavy tone with thinly concealed malice. I felt doubt sink its cold fingers into my mind as he spoke. Was he lying to me? Was I lying to him? Why does he want to know about my brother Shiloh so badly? Shiloh was my brother, of that much I was certain. I could still see his face in my mind when I closed my eyes. I could picture his unkempt blonde hair, and even after all these years I could still vaguely recall the sound of his voice. But then I realized that didn't make sense. Shiloh died at birth, so how could I have memories of him being much older? Never mind, said Dr. Sweets with a dismissive wave of his hand. Oh, what did you say to your father next? After that, I said to him, Of course, Dad. Love you too. He nodded and took another sip from his coffee mug before he went over to the coat rack by the door, donned his work jacket, and walked out into the shadows of the early morning without saying another word to me. As I stood alone in that kitchen, watching him start up his truck from the window and vanish down the street, I was certain of only one thing, and that one thing was that my dad had lied to me. The veneer of unshakable confidence that he wore like a mask had slipped off just long enough for me to see that the question had shaken him. I didn't know what he was hiding, but I knew that I wasn't crazy, and at the time, that was enough for me. I often pondered how different my life could have been had I chosen to run away at that very moment. If I had, maybe things would have turned out differently. Or maybe if I hadn't boxed him in like that with my pointed questions, Dad wouldn't have felt threatened enough to do what he did, and I wouldn't have all this death on my conscience. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, though. Maybe it was already too late to stop him by then. Don't suppose I'll ever know, because I didn't run away. Instead, I decided to go about my normal daily routine as if nothing had changed, with the intent to search the garage after everyone had gone to sleep for that paint bucket, and whatever was within it that Dad was hiding from us. That night, however, something that was not altogether human began to keep watch over me as I lay in my bed. For the first time, I thought that he was just a shadow, which was an easy mistake to make because this entity, whatever it truly was a thing of shifting darkness that stood tall and motionless against the wall across from my bedroom window, leering over me. He had no distinguishing features save his two crimson eyes that burned bright red in the dark, never blinking, never moving from where I lay in my bed. The heavy scent of rotten eggs clung to him like a pungent veil, which always confused me back then. I'd wondered to myself, how could a shadow have a smell, and why that smell in particular? My mind simply couldn't comprehend it until many years later, when I learned that people often mistake the scent of brimstone for the scent of rotten eggs. Eventually, after at least a few hours spent petrified of an attack that never came, I worked up the courage to try and ask him, "What are you?" Well, I'll never know if he was capable of speech because he never spoke. But I knew that he understood me, because he shook his shapeless head at the question, as if to tell me that it was inappropriate to ask such a thing. Gradually, my fear turned into fascinated curiosity, and I began to ask every yes or no question I could think of. "Do you have a name? Something I can call you?" The shadow did not offer any answer to me beyond a slow nod. "Are you here to hurt me or my family?" This time he shook his head as if to say no. "Are you going to hurt anyone I know?" Again he shook his head. "But you are here for a specific reason." This time he nodded. I was getting somewhere, and excitement bled into my voice as I continued to question him. "Are you from another world?" He shook his head once more. As I questioned him, I became acutely aware of how dry my throat was, and I decided to go downstairs for some water, before I asked the shadow anything else. "I'm going to go get some water from downstairs, and then I'd like to ask you some more questions. I'll be right back." The shadow shook his head, and before I could react, he disappeared from his spot in front of my wall and materialized in front of my bedroom door, as if to block my exit. I was bewildered. "What do you mean, no? You can't just keep me in here. I need water." The shadow then reached down with one of his tendril-like limbs, passing through the carpeted floor as if it weren't there at all, and then retracting back into the room after a few moments with a filled glass of water that I recognized from the kitchen, which he then handed to me. I had no idea what to make of this situation, but felt that it was best to express gratitude, since I had no way of knowing everything that this entity was capable of, or any of his motivations. Thank you." The shadow did not respond. It simply stood there motionless until I decided to get back in my bed. Then it resumed its silent vigil against the wall across from me. It's clear to me now from the Shadow's behavior that he was a kind of guard, meant to keep me in my room through the night. And the implication of that realization brought questions to my mind that needed answers, though I was afraid of what those answers might be. I looked up at the Shadow that was my jailer and summoned up the courage to ask him what was on my mind. Did, someone send you here to watch me? In response, the Shadow gave me yet another slow nod of confirmation. Was that person my father? The Shadow did not respond to the question, or any others for the rest of the night. He just stood at his post stoically until exactly 6 a.m. and then dissipated, leaving nothing behind but the faint stench of rotten eggs and some discoloration on the paint of the wall he'd been standing in front of. Downstairs, I could hear Dad's work boots against the tiles again, and the sound filled me with a dread and uneasiness that it never had before. It was as if my house, the place I'd grown up in, had become somewhere unfamiliar and hostile, an alien landscape where every familiar sound and creak of a floorboard suddenly sounded foreign and threatening. For the first time, I understood that I did not know my father, or what he was capable of nearly as well as I thought I had. If he could make something like the Shadow obey his will and follow his orders, I shuddered to think of what else he could do. As I descended the stairs again, after getting dressed, I wondered what I could possibly do next in that situation. But the answers eluded me, and I carried a haunted expression with me into the kitchen, despite my best efforts to appear normal and unbothered. My Dad didn't seem to notice it, or at least he didn't acknowledge it as he greeted me with a smile and steaming mug of coffee just like he always did. "Morning, kiddo." I accepted the mug and thanked him quietly. "Did you have a long night?" he asked me casually as he turned to the stove and used a spatula to stir some eggs he was cooking. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words left my throat. I had no idea what to say, and I was equal parts terrified and aghast at how flippantly my father was treating the whole situation. As it turned out, I didn't need to say anything. Dad could sense my fear and unease, and took it upon himself to address the proverbial elephant in the room with a sigh while he made a plate of breakfast for me. "I know you have questions, son. It's only natural. Believe me, I wish I could tell you everything. But it's too soon. You're not ready yet." Now that the subject was out in the open, questions poured out of me like water from a burst dam. What was that thing? Where did it come from? What are you doing in the garage? Dad's expression was pensive as he evaded my questions. "I really do admire you, son. It takes a lot of courage to ask the things you're asking right now. I know you must be confused and maybe a bit frightened, but I need you to trust me when I say that everything I do for you, for our family. You'll thank me when the work is done." "You gonna hurt us?" I asked. Genuine hurt and sadness washed over Dad's face at the question before he answered indignantly. "I would never. I love you kids more than anything in the world. That's why I pulled an angel from heaven itself to watch over you and keep you safe." There was a look of mad certainty in his eyes while he said this, the expression of a person who could not and would not be argued with no matter what you said to them, and who under no circumstances would consider that they were wrong. I knew from experience it would be pointless to continue with that particular line of questioning, so I moved on to my next one. "Are you, gonna hurt someone else?" Dad suddenly looked very tired when I asked that. "Leave it alone, son, please, for the good of our family, just leave it alone. You'll understand why I had to do it when the work is done." Our conversation was interrupted by the front doorbell. "That's probably Haley. You should let her in," Dad said as he turned his back to me to pour another cup of coffee for himself, effectively ending our conversation. I was by no means content with being dismissed in such a manner, with my questions unanswered, but the mention of Haley's name sent a cold, nauseous feeling down my back that settled in my stomach and made me feel sick enough to momentarily put aside my questions to go see her. Haley Mathis was our neighbor, and one of my closest friends since elementary school. She'd often come by in the early morning to make sure I was awake for school, and to walk there with me when the weather permitted, since the walk was only about 15 minutes or so, and her father, Lucas, didn't like her walking anywhere alone. She was an outgoing and friendly person, which was a pretty steep contrast to my own somewhat introverted personality, and she had a way of getting me to come out of my shell and engage with people in a way that my other friends really couldn't do. Now, from the outside, one might be inclined to mistake our close friendship for a romantic interest. God knows more than a few of our other friends, and even our parents would love to tease us with that insinuation. It just wasn't the case. Didn't really understand this at the time, or maybe I just had a real time admitting it to myself. But I was gay. Now, in hindsight, I think Haley knew even before I did. She'd love to talk with me at length about movie stars and boys from our class that she found attractive, while I just nod my head non-committedly. She had a peculiar awareness of unspoken feelings and a talent for reading between the lines, which is why when I opened the door for her that morning, she could immediately tell that something was wrong. Concern painted her face as she spoke to me. "You okay, Wally?" Did my best to compose myself as I answered. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just not really awake yet. It's nothing." Haley started to move past me to enter the house, and I instinctively threw my arm up to block her entry. "No, it's all right. I'll be out in a second. Just stay here, please." Before she could reply, I felt my father's firm grip on my shoulder and heard his voice melt back into its usual, confident and friendly tone. "Morning, Haley. Hey, come on in. I just made you kids some breakfast." I wanted to scream, to yell as loud as I could and tell Haley that she couldn't come into the house, that it wasn't safe. But fear kept me silent. Uneasy confusion began to crawl over Haley's face as she noted the clear tension between my father and I, but she remained her usual polite and upbeat self as she responded. "Morning, Pops. Well, that really does sound great, but Wally and I should really stop walking. Going to be late for school if we don't." I turned as much as I was able to see my father's mildly disappointed expression at her cordial refusal, before he relented. "All right. I'll put it in some Tupperware for you guys to eat when you get home. Have a good day at school. Stay close to one another on the way there, all right? In the dark, all you have is each other." He squeezed my shoulder tightly as he said this, before he handed me my book bag and ushered me out of the front door, closing it gently behind me and vanishing back into the bleak darkness of the house. I must have sprinted off of the porch and down the driveway like a bolt of lightning, because the next thing I remember is Haley's panting and exhausted voice probing me for information. "What's going on, Wally? You're freaking me out." I looked back at her with fear and uncertainty in my eyes, completely unsure of what to tell her. I knew that I couldn't lie to her, but I also didn't know if she believed the truth if she heard it. So I told her what I could. "I think my dad's going crazy," I said between deep, labored breaths. "What do you mean?" "Well, he's doing something in the garage. Don't know what. I hear terrifying sounds coming from there at night. Try to find out what makes them, but he started locking me in my room at night. I think to keep me from finding out what's going on in there." "Are you sure you just didn't have a nightmare?" she wondered aloud, clearly uneasy with the implications of what I was telling her. "It wasn't a freaking nightmare, Haley. It's real, and I'm freaking terrified that something awful is about to happen." Okay, calm down. Why don't we go to the police then?" "Tell them what? That I'm hearing weird sounds? They'll laugh us out of the station." "Don't scream at me. I'm trying to help." Our conversation was cut short by the low rumble of the police cruiser that broke through the early morning fog and slowed to a stop on the road beside us, then rolled down its passenger side window to reveal the slightly obscured but still recognizable face of Officer Miles Morgan. A thin, wiry man in his late 40s with a carefully trimmed mustache and cloudy blue eyes set behind wide-rimmed glasses that neighborhood kids often teased him for. He lived a few houses down from Haley and I shared a few classes with his sons. Never really liked him much, not because he was unfriendly, no, quite the opposite. He really was always very polite and friendly to Haley and I. Well, it was the kind of superficial friendliness that very transparently indicated some kind of ulterior motives. I could tell even then that he badly wanted our trust, though at the time I couldn't really fathom why, and to put it bluntly, it gave me the creeps. He smiled at the two of us and pressed a quiet breath through his yellowing teeth before he spoke. "Morning, kids. Everything all right?" I answered as cordially as I could, given the circumstances. "Yeah, officer, we're fine." Haley followed up my declaration with a friendly smile and a quick, affirming nod. She didn't like Officer Morgan any more than I did, but she was a lot better at hiding her distaste. The old cop's eyes seemed to linger on her for a moment, before he looked back at me and tried to carry on the conversation. Even though it would have been clear to any onlookers from our body language that the both of us desperately wanted the conversation to end. "Is your dad home, Wally? Beginning to talk to him for a while now, but he never seems to be around when I come calling." Now, I want to make it clear at this point. I did not trust my dad. I felt like the stress of the past year had broken his mind, that there was a very real chance that he was up to something awful. But at the same time, I trusted Officer Creepazoid even less. There was no way in hell I was going to tell him anything about my dad's whereabouts, so I shrugged off his question. "Well, I think he's at work." Officer Morgan made a quiet clicking sound with his teeth, followed by a sigh of disappointment before he spoke. "Well, I might have to stop by later when he's in. Oh, let him know I asked for him when you see him next, would you, Wally? It's important that he and I have words." "Is something wrong? Is Dad in trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, but in the back of my mind wondering if he knew something about my dad that I didn't. "Oh, no, nothing serious. The boys and I are just missing him down at Sully's and figured I'd go check in on him." Sully's was the local dive bar nestled on the edge of town where most of the men of Coulter gathered after hours to drink their sorrows away. Dad had been something of a regular there for a few years. I'd assumed that he was still going there a lot since he was often out until very late into the night for a few months now, and if what Officer Morgan was telling me was true, that left me to wonder where Dad was actually going at night. "Well, what do you mean you've been missing him? Isn't he in there all the time?" "No, not for at least a few weeks." "Oh, all right. Well, me and Haley have to get going to school now, officer. We're going to be late." "Well, you kids can hop on in if you want. I'll give you a ride," he offered with a smile that he probably intended to be warm, but instead it chilled me. "Oh, no thanks. Look, we like walking." Haley, who thus far had said nothing, suddenly piped up to enthusiastically agree with me. "Yeah, nothing like a brisk morning walk to start the day off." Officer Morgan seemed to stare at the two of us for a few moments before he shrugged. "All right. Well, walk safe, kids." Then he rolled up his window and proceeded slowly up the street. Haley and I shared a loud sigh of relief when the police cruiser finally disappeared from view. I was about to turn and say something to her when a familiar, pungent stench overpowered my nostrils and I froze in place. Rotten eggs. Oh, there was no mistaking it. I whirled around, determined to find the source of the stench, and just at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of crimson-red eyes receding into the morning fog. I knew then that my new friend was close by, somewhere just out of sight, watching, and perhaps waiting for something. I stood there staring into the fog, completely unaware of my surroundings, until Haley's voice broke me from my musings and brought me back to reality. "Wally!" Her voice startled me, and I looked back at her with a queasy, sickened expression. "What's wrong?" she asked me. I don't think we're alone." The face told me that she had no idea what to think, but she nodded regardless and took my hand, keeping me steady as we walked in the direction of the school. Looking back on it now, I can say without a doubt that Haley was my best friend. She was the kind of friend I think that everyone should have in their lives, unwavering in her support, and putting her friend's well-being first even when she didn't totally understand the situation. She was a good person in every sense of the term. I was lucky to have her in my life. Anyone else would have written me off as a lunatic or just a bored kid that wanted attention, but not her. She could see the fear in my eyes and knew that whatever I was dealing with was very real and terrifying. Let's just focus on getting to school right now. We'll figure out the rest later. It'll be okay, Wally," she said gently as she smiled her signature bright smile at me and walked me the remaining mile or so to school. I don't remember much about that particular school day. Specific details are lost somewhere in the vast, labyrinthine caverns of my memory. Given what I'd been through, the banal normalcy of high school just seemed unimportant. I can recall one moment of that day with clarity, though. The moment when I first began to piece together exactly what my father might have been doing when he left the house at night. I'd been in study hall, sitting at my desk in the back of the classroom, keeping to myself and pretending to work on homework, when I was really just waiting for the clock to hit 2:30, when I overheard a conversation between a trio of girls that sat across from me as they huddled around a phone screen. "That's the third one in 2 months. There's no way that's a coincidence. That must be a cult or something. Oh, you watch too many horror movies, Bree. That kind of shit doesn't happen in real life. Probably some psycho that gets off on kidnapping little boys." I knew then that they must have been talking about Joey Harrison, a kid from a town over, whose face and name had been plastered all over the local news stations when he'd vanished about a block from his home a few days earlier with no discernible trace. His disappearance had been the grim answer to the question of whether or not there was a predator or similar exceedingly disturbed individual stalking the peaceful neighborhoods and quiet streets of our county that many concerned citizens had been asking themselves over the past year. A question the police seemed reluctant to address, that now appeared to have an obvious answer. Joey had been the third. The first had been a kid named Brian Mathers, who disappeared on his way home from the public library about 9 months earlier, without leaving any sign of a struggle or faintest clue to his whereabouts. The second kid was named Matthew, if I remember correctly, Matthew Durst. I vaguely remember watching coverage of his disappearance from a local park on the news. He'd apparently told his mother that he was going off to play baseball with some friends before he vanished just like the others. Well, one missing boy was a tragedy. 2 could have been a terrible coincidence, but 3 was a pattern. It seemed clear now that someone, somewhere, was taking these boys, and despite the uproar in the community about it, no one seemed to have the faintest idea of who or why. Well, no one but me. I didn't make the connection at first. As afraid as I was of my father at this point, I didn't think he was capable of being involved in something so heinous as the kidnapping of multiple children. I was prepared to tune out the girls' conversation and write off the disappearances as something awful, and yet totally unrelated to my situation, until I heard the name of the street Joey had disappeared from. "My brother walks down Jackson Street every day. Oh, this shit is freaking me out." Well, that stopped me cold. My dad had been remodeling a house on that street for a while now. I remember hearing him talking on the phone about it with several people, and as much as I didn't want to consider it, I couldn't shake the possibility that there was a connection. I took out my phone to do some impromptu research. What I found made me sick to my stomach. The public library, the park, Jackson Street. My dad had done jobs near all of these places in the past year, at times disturbingly close to the disappearances of these boys. No, I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny the possibility. I scrolled through article after article, combing through information, looking for anything that would prove to me that my father could not have been behind these horrible crimes, only to find a still image that ripped my world apart. It had been a blurry image captured by the CCTV camera of a gas station on Jackson Street, and the last known image of Joey Harrison as he walked up the sidewalk. On that right-hand side of the image, I could make out the shape of a familiar work truck, the very same one that often picked me up from school and took me to my friends' houses. Well, the image was grainy, too grainy to be of any use to the authorities, but to me, it was unmistakable. The rest of the school day was a blur to me. I felt as if someone had pulled the ground out from under me, and that I was falling through an all-consuming darkness. The world was suddenly a much darker place than it had been a week ago, and with the exception of Haley, I had almost no one I could trust to help me grapple with it. The true depths of my father's depravity were becoming clear to me at that moment, and I found myself wishing that it was just all some awful nightmare that I'd soon wake up from. I remember pacing back and forth in front of the flagpole at the school's entrance as a bitter wind gusted over me and dark clouds gathered overhead, obscuring the light of the afternoon sun, waiting for Haley with my heart racing a mile a minute so that I could share my discovery with her. Minutes creeped by at an agonizing pace as I waited, and when she didn't emerge after 20 minutes or so after the bell, I felt in my gut that something was wrong. I bolted inside the school to search for her, asking anyone I passed by if they'd seen her, only to be met with indifferent shrugs, until I came across Mrs. Galloway, the school counsellor, who told me in a reassuring and almost grandmotherly manner that Haley had been feeling sick and that she'd gone home early. Nothing to worry about at all, Buttercup, she said to me with an ear-to-ear smile. There was something unsettling about how she said it. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd expected me to come here and ask about Haley's whereabouts. I tried to dismiss the feeling as simple paranoia, because, after all, my father was one thing, but Mrs. Galloway? Well, she had no reason to lie to me. I was about to turn and leave when another question slipped out of me before I could stop myself. What did she say she was sick with? Well, Mrs. Galloway blinked at the question and said nothing for several moments. Her demeanor reminded me of a character in a YouTube video, frozen in time while the video was buffering before she finally answered. Oh, she just had a bit too much sugar before bed. Gave her nightmares, the poor dear. But she's home now, safe and sound. Don't you worry, Buttercup. I knew then that she was lying to me. Her words echoed my father's, and it chilled me to the bone. Also at that moment, I became acutely aware that we were both alone in the hallway outside our office with no one else in sight. The fluorescent lights above my head began to flicker as if they were losing power, bathing the area in darkness. Oh, you look a little pale, Buttercup. Why don't you come into my office and lay down for a bit? I'll get you some hot cocoa, she said as she extended her arm outward to reach for me. I looked on in dumbfounded horror as her withered arm seemed to stretch and grow as it reached for me. A strangled gasp escaped my lips, and I fell backwards as black talons sprouted forth from beneath her fingertips and brushed against my face before I fell and scrambled backward on the tile floor. I scrambled back away from Mrs. Galloway as something totally unreal and near indescribable unfolded in front of me. Her veins seemed to turn black as her limbs grew longer and her skin began to churn. It seemed less and less like she was changing into something else, and more like something utterly inhuman was trying to burst out from beneath her skin. Yet she didn't seem to be in pain. She kept that deranged smile on her face as thick black sludge began to pour from her lips, and her jaw seemed to unhinge like that of a snake's. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered on and off in rapid succession, filling the empty hallway with a deep Stygian darkness in between a few brief seconds of dim light. And I almost wished that they'd just gone completely black, because as the brief flashes of light illuminated Mrs. Galloway's contorted face and hideously deformed jaw, I could see what looked like a small humanoid head trying to push its way out of her throat. Two glowing red eyes opened at the center of its tiny face. When they looked into mine, I let out a horrified scream and took off running down the hallway in the opposite direction as fast as my legs could carry me despite my shock. As I ran, I heard the thing that was once Mrs. Galloway call out to me in an amused and distorted voice. Oh, don't go yet, Buttercup. Stay and have some cocoa. You'll often hear fans of horror movies talk about how stupid the protagonists are, how they seem to always make the worst possible decisions imaginable when the monsters show up, and how they, if placed in the same situation, will be much smarter and handle it much better. I know this because I was once one of those people. But after having lived through this ordeal, I can say with certainty that this is an easy thing to say from the comfort of your couch, when the lights are on and you know the monsters aren't real. But the reality of it is much different. When your life's on the line and the dark is closing in, You're not thinking, you're just trying to get away. As I ran down the dark hallway with evil at my back, I passed several doors and hallway intersections that, in hindsight, would have provided me with an easy escape if I weren't in a state of adrenaline-fueled panic. I ran until I reached a locked set of double doors that obstructed my path, and I nearly felt my heart stop. My heart was pounding as I tried desperately to rip the doors open to no avail, as I heard the creature that was once Mrs. Galloway call out to me. "Oh, there you are, Buttercup. Time to lay down." Well, against my better judgment, I turned and looked over my shoulder and nearly threw up as I saw that horrible monster approach. It was much larger now and approaching on all fours, his black talons scraping against the tile floor as it got closer. What was left of Mrs. Galloway hung from its hind legs like a sock it hadn't bothered to fully remove. Its head had swollen to the size of a trash can, and I could see rows of jagged teeth in its wide open maw. I was so terrified that I put my head down, curled into a ball, and tried to make myself as small as possible as I waited for the thing to inevitably pounce on me. And then I heard the thing let out an agonized scream as the smell of rotten eggs filled my nose. I looked up to see the shadow from my room, standing between me and the thing that was now wrapped in shadowy black tendrils that rose up from the floor and dug into its hide so tightly that blood oozed out from its constricted limbs. I tried to stand up, but the shadow held out an ephemeral hand, as if to tell me to hold still, before it turned back to the bound abomination and used its long black tendrils to rip it apart with brutal efficiency. I choked back vomit in my throat as I heard the thing that had been Mrs. Galloway just a few moments earlier squeal in pain, loudly at first, then quietly and pitifully, before its fragmented and broken body went rigid with the stillness of death. And the shadow turned back to me, raising me back onto my feet with one of its many arms and dusting me off. Reality was a very abstract concept to me in those long moments that I spent staring at the sentient darkness before me that had just saved my life from certain death. I wanted to yell and scream out in confusion and demand a million different answers to a million burning questions that plagued my mind in that moment. But the only words that breached my lips were, "Thank you." The shadow simply nodded in acknowledgement before receding backward down the hallway, dissipating into nothingness before I could even attempt to stop it. I don't remember how long I stood there in that hallway alone, the dismembered corpse of the monster, or even how I got home. All that I do remember is the feeling of the cold rain that pelted my skin as I walked up my driveway and the knot of disgust I felt building in my stomach as I observed Officer Morgan's unmarked police cruiser parked in it. My father stood at the cruiser's drive-side door with an expression of cold anger on his face as he listened to Officer Morgan's words through the rolled-down window. I only caught the tail end of their conversation before my father saw me coming up the driveway and cut him off. "You've gone too far, Bill. Grief can only excuse so much. There's no happy ending to the path you're on. The circle won't stand for this kind of exposure, and your position will not protect you from the consequences. Let me be perfectly clear, Miles. You're never to come to my property, speak to my son or his friends ever again. Now, if I find out that you have, and trust me, I will find out, there'll be a reckoning for you." His words were firm and final. Morgan narrowed his eyes at my father for a moment before he nodded in acknowledgement. "Have it your way." He then rolled up his window and slowly backed out of the driveway, casting a knowing glance at me before driving off into the rain. As I turned and approached my father, I saw his expression soften before he spoke. "Hey, kiddo." Anger welled up in my chest and I practically screamed my reply at him. "Where's Haley? What did you do to her?" Sincere-looking confusion spread across my father's face at my outburst, and he seeped into his voice. "Haley? What are you talking about, kiddo? Didn't she go to school with you?" I felt hot tears begin to flow down my face, even as the chilling rain washed them away, as all the fear, pain, and anger that had been building up in me over the past few months spilled out. "Stop lying to me. I know you people took her." My father stepped forward and placed his hands on my shoulders. "Hey, what happened, son? Tell me everything." Before I could stop them, the words spilled out of me like a torrent of water that burst from a dam. I told him about what had happened to me back at the school, about my search for Haley, and about Mrs. Galloway's hideous transformation. And the expression on my father's face as I told him these things was not one of surprise or disbelief, but rather one of cold anger. When I cried so much that my words came out choked and hoarse, my father relaxed his grip on my shoulders and beckoned me to follow him to his truck. I opened my mouth to demand an explanation, but he cut me off before I could. "Just get in the truck, son." "No." His face turned angry at my refusal for a moment, before melting into an expression of shame when he heard the fear in my voice. When he spoke again, he almost sounded like he was pleading with me. "Get in the truck, son. We're going to save Haley, and once we do, I'll tell you everything, I promise." I couldn't tell you exactly how long I stood there, still as a statue in the freezing rain, afraid to concede to my father's demands, but even more afraid of doing nothing. I knew that I didn't trust him, but I also knew in my heart by then that whatever evil was at work in Coulter ran much deeper than my father. They were in my school, probably in the sheriff's office too. I didn't know what else to do but agree to get in the passenger side of my dad's work truck and sit passively as he started the engine and drove us slowly down the driveway and down the darkened street as gargantuan storm clouds gathered overhead, smothering all sunlight from view. "Did he ever keep his promise?" asked Dr. Sweet, interrupting me once more, briefly breaking me out of my trance of reminiscence. Whether it was intentional or not, I couldn't say, but the doctor's question reawakened a very old pain deep in my heart, like picking open a wound that had scabbed over. "No," I said softly. The doctor's crimson eyes analyzed me passively as he took a long draw from his cigar, as if some intricate internal calculus kept him from replying immediately. Before long, however, he spoke up again. "Do you feel that if he had kept his promise, that if he'd had the opportunity to explain his motivations to you in detail, that would have somehow made his actions more palatable to you? Maybe even allow you to excuse them?" "Oh, the things my father did were inexcusable." "What about the things you did, Mr. Solomon?" "What are you talking about?" The doctor then reached into the right-hand side of his mahogany desk and produced a faded manila folder, which he placed neatly on the surface of the desk. "I have the autopsy report of one Haley Mathis. Oh, it's quite a morbid read. In fact, most would say it's tragic." "Where did you get that?" "Oh, I got it is of no consequence to your treatment, Mr. Solomon. What matters is its contents." Then opened the folder and began to read its contents aloud, showing all the emotion with which one might have read a dinner menu or a weather report. The examiner noted acute petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, a sure sign of strangulation, and also recorded several severe lacerations around the neck and abdomen with an unknown weapon. "Stop it," I screamed, not wanting to hear him talk about Haley like some inanimate object. "Therapy sometimes requires you go to painful places if you're to make a breakthrough, Mr. Sharp." "Why are you doing this?" "I'm doing this because you need to face what you've done if the treatment is to be effective. You need to be honest with yourself." "I've told you everything I can remember." "No. You've merely detailed the elaborate delusion your mind has crafted to excuse you from guilt."
"But what are you talking about?"
"You describe your victims as having turned into horrid, inhuman abominations so that you can rationalize what you did to them as self-defense. But it wasn't self-defense, was it, Mr. Solomon? As for this mystical shadow you describe, it's likely a kind of alter ego you've created to further disassociate yourself from your crimes."
No, you're wrong."
That is the logical conclusion that the evidence leads us to, Mr. Solomon. It also suggests very strongly that you aided and abetted your father in the massacre at Sully's bar.
You weren't there.
And give me the missing piece of the puzzle. Tell me about Shiloh so we can finally put all of this to rest.
You'll get what you're asking for soon enough, Doctor.
But you're going to regret it, I responded with grave certainty. Let me be the judge of that. What happened after you pulled out of the driveway with your father? After we pulled out of the driveway, Dad steered us into town as a massive storm brewed in the heavens above, past one of the town's only 2 gas stations and the string of little mom-and-pop shops that had been the town's main street for decades, with near total silence between us for minutes that felt like hours, before he finally spoke. When we get there, you have to stay close to me. Do exactly as I say, and it should be over quickly.
Where are we going?
I asked with mounting discomfort. We're gonna save Haley, and then we're gonna make sure that nobody can put you two in danger ever again.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry that it had to come to this, son. I'm sorry for what you're gonna have to go through because of my hubris. I see now that I was too arrogant. I thought that giving you your guardian angel would have been enough to keep you safe. Well, I did what needed to be done, but clearly I was wrong. So, we're going to cut these problems out at the root. He said this with cold malice dripping from his voice. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing and just sat in silence, listening to the bellow of thunder that roared overhead, doing my best to ignore the feeling of dread that twisted in my stomach as the bright neon lights of Sully's came into view and we pulled into the parking lot. Once we were parked, Dad reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the most evil-looking knife I'd ever seen in my life. The curved blade must have been just under a foot long, and its ornate handle was jet black and studded with dark purple gemstones. Spidery glyphs I couldn't even begin to read or understand stretched up the length of the blade, and the longer I stared at it, the more I thought I could make out dark spots of what could have only been dried blood along its edge. My unease instantly became alarm at the sight of this knife, and I begged my father for an explanation.
Dad? What are you going to do with that? Please, don't hurt anyone.
Quiet. I need to concentrate, he growled. He then closed his eyes and began tracing 2 of his fingers along the glyphs written upon the blade, whispering to himself as he did. I couldn't make out exactly what he was saying. It wasn't English. Definitely not any language I'd ever heard. But the words chilled me, both figuratively and literally. The truck grew colder as he spoke, so much colder in fact that frost began to climb up the inside of the windows and my breath became visible. Once he was finished, he opened the driver's side door and stepped out into the parking lot with the knife still in his hand, and he gestured for me to follow him. I hesitated for a moment, then did as he asked and followed him as he made his way across the parking lot toward the front door at a brisk pace. As we got closer to the door, I saw that there was no one outside save a large, bald-headed man in overalls that looked to be somewhere in his late 50s, sitting on a patio chair by the door smoking a cigarette. His eyes lit up with recognition as my father approached with a dagger in hand, and he greeted him knowingly. "Hey, Bill." "Hey, Pete," was all my father said before he reached into his coat pocket with his free hand and produced a huge black revolver, which he then used to shoot the old man point blank in the face. The shot rang out like an explosion, and I nearly pissed myself at the sound. I saw the old man's face liquefy as he slumped over in the patio chair, and gasped in horror as I saw a thick, viscous black sludge spill from his corpse rather than red blood. The body twitched and convulsed wildly in the chair in a manner reminiscent of Mrs. Galloway's transformation. In fact, it almost looked as if it was struggling to get up out of the chair when my dad stepped forward and plunged the knife into its abdomen. In response, the body shook violently, and I heard an inhuman cry ring out from his dead throat just before it went completely still. Without pausing, Dad kicked in the front door of the bar and walked inside with me close behind. Once we were inside, I saw maybe 3 or 4 people sitting at the dusty counter, regarding the two of us stoically. I caught a glimpse of Officer Morgan behind the counter, before he quickly vanished through a doorway that must have led to the bar's basement. As he fled, my father leveled his gun at the counter and cried out with the righteous fervor that was characteristic of him even then. "Morgan, I told you there'd be a reckoning." He then fired another shot at an old lady in a faded yellow dress that sat to the right of the counter just as all hell broke loose. Almost faster than I could see, customers seated at the counter swelled up and exploded like balloons, spraying this awful black sludge in every direction. I closed my eyes and screamed for the shortest of moments, expecting to see blood and exposed viscera all over when I opened them, only to see that in place of each of the customers that had exploded now stood twisted and vile creatures the likes of which could only have climbed out of the psychedelic fever dreams of some unhinged madman. Countless writhing and wriggling limbs reached out from contorted and deformed bodies as open maws filled with rows of jagged and broken teeth screamed chilling and monstrous battle cries before they leapt in unison at my father and I. Before I could process what was happening, black tendrils of pure darkness enveloped me, catching the creature's sharp claws before they could reach me. My ears registered the thunderous sounds of multiple gunshots, followed by the pained cries of the creatures as the arms of the shadow coiled around them and tore them to pieces, the way a child might have torn apart toys it had grown bored with. The wet sounds of tearing flesh and breaking bones, combined with the smell of gunpowder, overpowered my senses, and I remember throwing up on the barroom floor when it was over. The whole thing happened so fast, and the resulting carnage left around the counter was nothing short of horrific. Dismembered bodies barely recognizable as humanoid lay scattered all around as the arms of the shadow recoiled to somewhere behind me, and I turned to see what my father called my guardian angel floating behind my back, his burning red eyes vigilantly scanning the bar for any signs of danger, even though everything that could have threatened my father and I was now a bloody mess on the floor. As I looked back up at him, I opened my mouth to speak, only to have my father's voice cut me off. "We need to hurry, son. This thing is far from done and I need you close to me. Your angel will shield us both as long as you stay by my side." "How do you know she's down there?" I managed to ask, despite the overpowering nausea that gripped me. "This is the only place that they'd take her," he said with cool certainty, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out more rounds for his revolver and reloaded it with practiced efficiency while he stepped over the mangled corpses and made his way to the basement door behind the counter while brandishing that wicked dagger, totally unbothered by the carnage that now surrounded us. I didn't want to follow him down there, didn't want to be part of this at all, but I also wanted to save Haley, and even though I'm ashamed to admit it, I didn't want any harm to come to my father either. Even after all the terrible things I'd just seen him do, and the things I suspected him of. Well, he was still my dad. I didn't want him to die. I was such a child back then. Once we reached the doorway, he beckoned me to follow him, and once I caught up, he opened the basement door and began to descend the creaky wooden steps with the revolver ready to fire. "Morgan, you can't hide from me," he cried, only to be met with silence. As I followed close behind and my eyes began to adjust to the darkness of the mostly unlit basement, I could make out the dim glow of what seemed like candles once I reached the bottom of the steps. They were all laid out along a concentric circle of hastily drawn glyphs and runes that were beyond my comprehension, all surrounding an old-looking recliner at the far end of the basement. It's hard to tell in the darkness, but I could make out the silhouette of someone tied to the recliner who was totally still and motionless, and the shrouded but recognizable shape of a man standing in front of it. You've been reckless, Bill. Reckless and stupid. Now there's no undoing what has been done. The circle will take back what is theirs, and we'll all suffer for it. Entropy always wins in the end, it seems. I I heard Officer Morgan's voice in a grave and exhausted tone as he turned away from the recliner to face my father and I. His eyes were visibly bloodshot even in the dim candlelight, and his hands trembled ever so slightly at his sides. I could see a gun on his belt, but he made no motion to reach for it. Just stood there with a distant look in his eyes as my dad leveled his gun at him and shot him in the face without a word. Officer Morgan then crumbled to the ground like a sack of potatoes as Dad strolled over to him and drove the black dagger into his heart. The body jerked violently as the blade went in, for a brief moment before going still. Dad then turned to the recliner, and I heard both horror and anger in his voice as he looked upon the person bound to it. No, 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 no. He then hastily rushed over to the recliner and began cutting the ropes just in time for me to get a close enough look to see that it was Haley tied to the chair. She was breathing steadily and didn't look as if she'd been injured or abused in any way. But she still looked, well, wrong. Her skin was pale and clammy, and her hair that had been a deep open color was now ghostly white. Her eyes opened abruptly when Dad cut the last of the ropes that bound her to the chair, and my heart dropped into my stomach when I saw the burning crimson of her eyes that had once been a deep blue. She regarded my father with a look of cold disappointment before she spoke to him in a voice that was deep and inhuman, like that of a monster from some old fairy tale. "Hello, William." She then placed a hand on my father's head and launched him across the basement as if by some kind of telekinesis, slamming him against the wall and knocking the weapons from his hands. She then rose to her feet and regarded her own hands with an expression of abject disgust before she spoke. "What an insult it is to be bound to this meager flesh, all to make you answer for your sins. It's only fair that I make you suffer for this, William." She then turned and began to walk over to my father's broken and wheezing body before I called out to her. "Haley, what are you doing? What happened to you?" She stopped and turned to look back at me curiously before she answered in an amused tone. "Oh, child, there is no Haley anymore. This vessel belongs to me now." She then reached out to touch me, just as the arms of my guardian angel reached out to envelop me, and the dark void swallowed the world in front of me. I couldn't see or hear anything, and I couldn't think. It was as if all my senses were being smothered. Well, I've never taken much time to think about death, or what it would be like to be dead, but I imagined that it would be a lot like that. A void without sensation or thought. Well, I don't know how long I was unconscious, or what transpired while I was out, but when I awoke on the cool and damp basement floor, I saw everything in complete disarray, all the old furniture overturned and scattered, and I could see deep gashes in the stone floor. I looked around for Haley and felt the world crumble around me when I saw her lying beneath me with her face drained of all color, and my hands around her neck. I saw huge open wounds in her stomach, and I screamed. I tried to talk to her, tried to get her to wake up, but she was motionless. "She's gone, Wally. I'm sorry," I heard my father's voice say in a hoarse and labored tone. I turned and saw that he was still laying against the wall, barely moving, and I could see black blood flowing freely from his nose, with a wide, aghast look in his eyes, as if he'd just received a revelation. I ran over to him and reached out to try and help him up, but he caught my arm as I did, and looked at me with tears flowing down his cheeks. "Oh, I've been such a fool, Wally. All this death I've sown, just to find someone who'd already returned to us. I see that now, and I'm so sorry." Before I could respond, he pulled something out of his pocket and handed it to me. In the dim candlelight, I could see that it was an old cast-iron key. "Go to the garage, Wally, to the trapdoor under the work table. It's all hidden there. They won't stop until they have it back, but they must never have it. You'll have to kill them when they come. It's the only way, son. Oh, forgive me." He then retrieved the black dagger from the floor and drove it into his own chest in one swift motion. His body rattled violently for a moment, and then I was all alone in the world. Well, almost alone.
I don't remember my journey back to the house. So many of my memories are like pages in a journal cut away by an unknown hand, leaving only a vague picture of the full story behind. What I do remember is the trap door. I remember the smell of damp musk as I descended a wooden staircase into the subterranean chamber beneath my house. And I remember the pit in my stomach when I saw the concentric circle of runes almost identical to the one in the basement at Sully's, drawn around the 5-gallon paint bucket I'd seen months earlier, surrounded by 3 mounds of dirt that could only have been makeshift graves next to a work table stacked high with books and diagrams of the human body, the most prominent of which was a large leather book with a single red circle sketched on the cover. Now, not all of it was written in English, and the passages I could find that were in English were so laden with archaic language and technical terminology that they might as well have been hieroglyphs. Certain words did repeat often enough to stand out to me, though. Vessel, sacrifice, homunculus. Well, I must have spent an hour poring over that book, if only to avoid looking at that paint bucket. But when the bucket jerked in place and I heard a small strangled cry echo out from within, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. So I slowly made my way over to the bucket and lifted the lid. I stopped my recitation from continuing on my own this time, not wanting to revisit the memory. After a few moments of silence, however, Dr. Sweet leaned forward in his chair and prodded me for more information. And what was in the paint bucket? I took a long breath before I answered, and let the weight of the secret I'd buried for 20 years fall from my shoulders. It was wearing my brother's baby clothes, but it wasn't my brother. It was just a crude facsimile crafted of stolen and necrotic flesh, breathing and screaming, but not truly alive, just an imitation of life. A grieving madman's misguided attempt to replace someone he'd lost. Silence filled the dreary office following my proclamation, for just a moment before the doctor spoke again. So, this creature in the paint bucket, that was Shiloh. No, doctor. That thing was not my brother. My brother has never left my side. I see. So, what did you do next? After that, I burned all of it. The garage, the house, everything. I used my dad's work truck to drive far away from Coulter. And after it ran out of gas, I used the money in his wallet to buy a bus ticket to take me even further. And I've been wandering ever since, trying to stay ahead of the people who were after me, and avoiding them at all costs before they got hurt. Before they got hurt? Don't you mean before they hurt you? Oh, no. Dr. Sweet didn't seem satisfied with that answer, and his voice dripped with venom when he spoke again. What about the book? What did you do with the book? Why does that matter, Doctor? Answer the question. I burned it with everything else. It's only ashes now. Oh, you're lying, Mr. Solomon. We both know that book cannot be burned. Don't know what you're talking about. What if I told you where your mother was right now? What? It's within my power to do so. She is alive and well and very much wants to see you again. He then pulled out a small envelope sealed with red wax from one of his desk drawers and displayed it to me. I have here a letter addressed to you from your mother. It contains her whereabouts as well as some lovely well wishes for you. If you wish to have it, you'll bring the book to me at this location in precisely 3 days' time, and we'll complete your treatment. If you ignore my request, then we will never see each other again, and any opportunity you had to see your mother once more will evaporate. And you'll never know the truth about what happened back then, or the full scope of the things your family is involved in. Well, I had at least a dozen more questions for this man, but the only one that passed my lips was, how do I know you're not lying to me? You only have one way to find out, Mr. Solomon. 3 days. And then, in the blink of an eye, all of it was gone. The desk, the paintings, the sculptures, and the doctor himself, leaving me on a dusty old chair in an empty office alone with my thoughts, listening to the sound of summer rain as it tapped on the window like thousands of little fingers, until the smell of brimstone filled my nostrils and the dark shadow with crimson eyes that had been my only companion all these lonely years stepped out of nothingness and stood in front of me, watching and waiting for me to decide what I wanted to do next, as it reached a shadowy tendril out to touch my shoulder as if to offer comfort. And I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I spoke to him aloud and asked him a desperate question. Well, what should I do, Shiloh?
Okay, so another epic one for you for your Monday evening's entertainment. I hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did recording it for you. A lot going on in that one. Yeah, I kind of tried to warn you in the introduction. It was going to be a bit of a philosophical, pondering kind of moment. What am I talking about? I don't know. Nothing's making sense to me right now. Anyway, it's a long one for your Monday evening's entertainment. I'll be back again. God, what days? I don't know. Very, very busy at the moment. It's a time of year when all my students have handed in their papers and I have to grade them. So during the day, I'm busy looking at stuff and the brain doesn't work so good in the evening. So my apologies if none of this is making any sense to you at all. Oh, all right. Well, I'll be back again tomorrow night on the other channel with a podcast. Back here again on Wednesday. There's a story I started a couple of weekends ago. I promised I would, finish it pretty quickly. And we're going to go back to the depths of the Congo, I think, on Wednesday evening. So sorry for those who've been waiting a couple of weeks for that. It is coming, I promise. Well, that's it for this evening. Till the next time, my dear friends, you all sleep well and remember it's just a story, eh? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.